Hi there, my name is Marcel and you guys have been mighty excited for this video, huh? A comment that I get a lot is... where do I start to learn how to draw? There are so many different tutorials on YouTube, where do I even begin? This one. This video right here. So what I'm going to do today is to give you a whole roadmap on how to learn how to draw and get into art from the very start. I don't know if you like manga or if you're more into portraits or landscapes, but it doesn't matter because after explaining the roadmap, I'll be giving you guys an overview on different art styles and I'll tell you what kind of skill you will need for which art style. So that after this video, you'll know which skills you'll need to level and which ones you can leave on the to-do list for later. Also, I do have one special extra skill I didn't know where to put on this roadmap. It's less of a skill and more of a tip or something you should look out for. So yeah, I'm going to leave this at the end of the video. I think you can see how much effort I put into this video. As always, this whole video was completely scripted, written, recorded and edited by myself, by only one person. I had lots of conventions and workshops lately. I was also terribly busy at my 9-to-5 job, but I still made this video the best that I possibly could. So as always, I would appreciate your guys' support. Help me make more content for you. And if you would like to see more of my videos in the future, join my crew, become my nakama. Alright then, ready? Then let's learn how to draw from scratch, like a sir. I need to prepare you guys for this. There are a lot of skills I'm going to show you all. And spoiler, but I think it's the best if you don't skip any of them. They can always come in handy later on. Because otherwise you will end up like the person from my last video and you obviously don't want that. Alright, skill number 1 is as basic as it gets. Let's call this one line work. Before you're getting into art, I think it would be best to not keep any bad habits. Because they die hard. Like an Elden Ring boss. TLDR, you should work on your skill to make some clean strokes with your pencil. This makes a world of difference if you actually compare even the simplest of drawings, one done by a person who has practiced a line work and one who hasn't. I mentioned this before, but I think sketching like that comes from insecurity because you're not quite sure where to literally draw the line. Don't get me wrong here, I also use sketched lines when I want to draw lines a bit thicker, but that's just for cosmetics. When sketching the actual base, I really only sketch with clean, distinct lines, and so should you, at least in my opinion. And what I just did, well, in this business, we call it foreshadowing.
Wait a minute!
Because now, we're going to put the skill of line work to the test. I couldn't think of a name for this one, so I just let you guys decide for the name for this one on Insta. That one sounds professional, I like that. Anyways, you guys are welcome to, right now, grab a pencil and check if you already acquired the simple shape design skill. I always preach that you should be able to draw the most basic shapes so that you're able to draw a decent human later on by using all of these shapes in the process. But are you able to draw the most simple shapes there are? For real, could you draw some clean triangles, circles and squares? Because in order to do this, you would obviously need the previous line work skill in order to make these shapes look so clean. Otherwise you would see a pretty big difference right away. And in case this doesn't work out for you yet, well, quantity is the word of the hour here. Now the natural evolution here would be to evolve to the next dimension. If you were to Google something like shape sketching practice, you will notice that most results on Google Images are not simple 2D sketches, but rather they are almost all 3-dimensional shapes. Again, if you're a long-term viewer of this channel, you all know some examples I showed you before. Sketching out 3-dimensional shapes as guidelines is leagues more realistic than just using some plain old circles and squares. Also, don't think I only talk about comics or manga here, this also goes for portraits and anything else you can sketch out. If something looks more 3-dimensional, it almost always looks more believable as well. And maybe, if you paid attention, you saw that this skill isn't called 3D drawing, but more 3D vision. It's not only about simply drawing a cube instead of a rectangle, it's also about seeing shapes or objects and understanding how or of what shapes they are made of. I wouldn't call this skill perspective though. This is more like a baby version of perspective. Just understanding the three-dimensionality of shapes and objects and knowing how to draw them. Before actually tackling perspective, I have another skill I would like to introduce you to. Now, I don't think this is going where you think it does, but yeah, basically learning how to draw humans is obviously important. I actually don't suggest you read into things like detailed anatomy right away, because that's also something that people flood my Instagram DMs with. Why does my drawing of a human body look like a shriveled up blow-up doll? Believe me, that's a kind of message I basically get at least once per day. People see detailed artworks and are like, yeah, I need to draw like that as well. So they desperately try to add all of these different details and muscle groups without even knowing how to draw the most basic human proportions. That's why your characters are getting this dehydrated corpse strip. You're already trying to learn skills from way up in the skill tree, all the way from above. Detailed anatomy is something you shouldn't even be touching with a 10-foot pole right now. What you need to learn are proportions, basically meaning how a body is constructed and what the size of the individual parts are. And that's precisely why I call this skill Simple Anatomy, but you might as well just call this one Proportions. Also, a little tip I have for you all: if you can stop your ADHD brain from drawing details already, you can at least use some space for that. Sketching your drawings a bit bigger really gives you some room to breathe and can make some huge difference. I don't recommend it, but if you totally have to, that's how I would go about it. In case you never dabbled in this topic of perspective before, this is the point where you could at least get your feet wet. Just like before, these are still the very simple basic skills, because at this point we are still at the very beginning of your art journey. So I think it's best to still stick to the basics. While drawing and using perspective, you need to know about vanishing points. You could have 3 in total in every artwork. While editing this video, I got to answer a couple of messages about this topic, so I thought I could at least just quickly note this here. Of course, there are artworks with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 vanishing points. Like, 4 vanishing points, kinda cool, but I honestly doubt that most of you will ever draw something like this. Anyway, you could totally read into this if you absolutely want to though. Drawing an artwork with 1 vanishing point's kinda easy, while having one with 3 can be kinda challenging. So for now, I think it's enough to learn how to use at least 1 vanishing point. Otherwise, this could be a bit too much input for starters. If you learn how to use this 1-point perspective, you'll also be able to draw some more advanced 3D scenarios. So if you break it down, it really is exactly what we've learned up until now. A couple of 3D shapes and boxes with clean line work that point towards 1 perspective, 1 vanishing point. So yeah, of course this is still very basic, but at least it doesn't look incredibly amateurish if you go about it the right way. At least this artwork right here was good enough for me to print it into the 2nd volume of my manga series, so yeah, simple doesn't have to mean bad. And if you care about my manga series, you can take a look at it on my website. But enough of that. We are almost at the point where we're going into advanced territory. So let's take a look at the next skill you could practice in case you've come this far. And that would be... I think dynamics are what differentiates an okay-ish artwork from a really good one. I mean, look at this. It's the same character, the same knowledge, and the same skills here. The only thing that's different here is the dynamics the character is laid out with. My subscribers are probably already familiar with this dynamic line. And I think at this point, right before we're going into advanced territory, this is the perfect timing to learn about this. At this point, you're not an absolute beginner when it comes to drawing, so it's not too early, but you're also not too advanced. Wait, what? You can be too advanced? Yeah, just wait, I'll show you what I mean by that. It's the same as with the anatomy example from the beginning. You remember that one, right? Please don't tell me TikTok already destroyed your attention span that much.
Hey, you're supposed to watch this video right now. I've worked on these animations for weeks, god damn.
Yeah, for those who remember, it's the same exact example from the beginning. If you're too absorbed into drawing the details, you neglect the basics. It's as simple as that. And dynamics are something you also apply at the very start. Dynamics are something you plan out before you draw in all of those details. And since we're still in the beginner territory, this is basically the best timing to practice drawing those simple mannequins you've learned to draw before with some dynamic poses. And now that we've finished the simpler beginner topics, some of you might wonder what kind of time frame would be realistic for this kind of knowledge up until now. Could you learn all of this within a day? Or maybe like a week? The answer to that is there is no answer. Never has been. With my tutorials on drawing perspective, anatomy and dynamics and all of these different kinds of stuff, you could easily learn all of this in round about one day. But that doesn't mean that you've actually acquired all of these skills. It's just like watching a quick tutorial on differential equations and then actually solving them yourself. Just watching tutorials won't be enough. It takes weeks or maybe months of actual practice until you can actually do all of this beginner stuff we've covered by yourself. Take your time, learn the basics. Pressure is absolute poison to your creativity, so don't rush things. After all, you don't want to be that guy. So, y'all ready? Then let's get more advanced. The first advanced skill I would suggest to learn is advanced perspective. Like I said, you can learn how to draw perspective with 2 and 3 vanishing points as well, and this can get pretty challenging depending on your subject. Obviously, people always associate vanishing points with landscapes, but that's not always the case. You could also use vanishing points to check if the perspective of your object matches up. Why would I just draw some cubes anymore? Isn't this advanced territory? Well, yeah, this is advanced territory, but you still need these cubes you've learned to draw at the beginning as guides to now actually draw more advanced stuff. So by using 3-point perspective, you get to draw some pretty crazy perspectives. That's why I put this skill at the very start of the advanced territory, because it all depends on how you use it. Vanishing points are a very helpful tool for pro art, but it's also something you could still use earlier on for more basic art. The next advanced lesson would be shape design. You've learned to draw some easier 3D shapes, but if you would manage to draw some really hard shapes and objects, you can basically draw, well, anything. From out of this world Lovecraftian objects to a coffee mug. If you truly master the skill, you can just combine it with your 3D vision skill from earlier, and you can literally draw anything just by looking at it. This obviously takes a ton of practice, but you have the tools right at your hand. You have the skill of 3-point perspective to check the perspective of an object, 3D vision to understand how it's made up, being able to draw any shape in order to copy it, and also the very first skill you've learned, some nice line work. And that's why this skill is a bit earlier into advanced territory as well. Not because it's easy by any means, but because it's so useful. Doesn't matter if you're a portrait artist and your portrait model's wearing some weird necklaces that you need to copy, or if you want to draw a statue from a certain building. With this skill, in combination with all of the previous skills, you can basically draw everything. I didn't make a video about practicing shapes yet, but I think the best course of action here would be to just Google some advanced shapes and try to practice that way. Now, here's the elephant in the room, anatomy. Yeah, alright, if you're someone who's only drawing headshots or humans, you could obviously learn this a bit earlier. A lot of things on this roadmap depend on preference, but I just think it's a lot better to accumulate all of the skills I already mentioned. I think I've listed off enough reasons already. So yeah, this part here completely depends on if you actually care about drawing human faces at all. I guess landscape artists really couldn't care less about this topic, but otherwise, this is the point where I would say the floodgates are open, and you should learn anything about the human face there is. There are a lot of different methods for learning how to draw human faces and heads, like the Steve Houston method, the Loomis method, the Riley method, and so on. I personally think they are a good way to get started into this topic and learn how to draw a human face. But with time, you'll probably develop your own method anyway, just like I did. Don't worry, you'll arrive at this point once you know the ins and outs of the human face. Now, once you're able to draw shapes and faces and all of that, you could finally advance into giving your art a bit more depth. Of course, you could also read into this earlier, but I think everything else I mentioned so far is far more important than shading. After all, what good is shading if you're not even able to draw a human base correctly? Like I said, this is where you could get your feet wet, so you could learn it the most simple way, with simplified planes that tell you where to shade darker and where to shade lighter. That's at least the approach that I went with when I made a tutorial about this topic. I think this is a nice way for beginners to get into this topic and get a grasp on how shading actually works. There's one last skill before we split up our roadmap, and that's, of course, anatomy as a whole. Since I don't want to treat you guys all the same, this skill here could literally mean anything. If you're an artist who focuses on animals, then study the ever-loving heck out of any animal that you're drawing. Same goes for fantasy creatures and anything else. If you've come this far with your art, I think you're good enough to pick for yourself what kind of anatomy you would want to learn. Be it animals, fantasy creatures, men, women, or whatever. But at least with human anatomy, I mean the whole 9 yards. You could learn how to draw anatomically correct hands, how the muscles of a human body interact with one another, and so on. This skill alone basically takes a lifetime to complete. You'll never really be finished learning about this stuff. The most important thing though is that you're tackling this after learning about the simpler version with all of the proportions. Because otherwise, yeah. And now here's where things get interesting. I honestly don't think it matters which one of these skills you'll learn first. It honestly comes down to preference. Just be prepared, just like with anatomy, these are also some advanced skill sets, so they take ages to actually master. I'd even dare to say some of them are topics that take a lifetime to master because you never really stop learning about them. You could really level up your shading to get to the advanced shading skill, for example. Instead of just plain black and white, you'll also learn how to shade with multiple light sources and how light interacts with your subject in case you acquire the skill. This also kinda requires you to learn a bit of color theory, so you can bet this can take ages to fully master. Same goes for rendering. This is basically the art of adding details to your drawing. Some famous examples are cross-hatching or smooth blending. There are many different ways or styles of rendering your art, and which one you should pick depends on a lot of factors. Like, for example, what medium you're using. Are you working in color or with black and white? Truly one of the most individual skills you could have. And last but not least, composition. This topic is incredibly underrated, yet so vast. By learning and also mastering this composition skill, you never really have problems with picking backgrounds anymore, because abiding by these rules means you already know which kind of background fits which subject or motive. I already wrote articles about this and how I'm using composition in my art, and I really want to make a video about this sometime. But like I said, these topics are so vast, a composition video would be pretty much as long as this video right here, if not longer. But I will upload it eventually, just subscribe to the channel and you'll get notified when I upload a video about Oh yeah, right, I did mention this hidden skill at the beginning, didn't I? This skill isn't really part of the roadmap per se, so let's tackle that one last. Because I also promised you guys to give you an overview of what skills you would need to learn with the style that you're pursuing. So let me just give you an overview of what the most common styles are and what skills you would need for them. The most important part is that it doesn't matter which style you're pursuing, you will need the basic skill set I mentioned. Until that point, I would really urge you guys to master all of these skills because they can come in handy in every style. Now let's start with the one that you're all probably familiar with, portraits. I think portraits are kind of self-explanatory, but I'll say it anyway. Facial anatomy and shading should be absolutely mastered skills here. Also, since you need to deliver the most aesthetically pleasing outcome with portraits, you should be able to render it the best you possibly can. And something else, composition. It's not absolutely mandatory, but knowing where to place the face on your page and how big it should be, which corners should stay blank, and where to push the weight of your artwork and so on should elevate your portrait to another level. Because the devils, in the detail after all. With landscapes, you obviously won't need any detailed or advanced anatomy. I think the basics should be enough to add a couple of humans to your artwork or landscape. Something you should absolutely max out though is composition. Also, perspective is absolutely non-negotiable here. I know there are artists who just paint some loose shapes without any perspective at all, but since this video is more about drawing than painting, I'll just ignore this point. Shading, and by that extension also color theory if you're painting, is a must-have. You should definitely max that out. And other than that, I think rendering could also be pretty important here. Shape design also couldn't hurt, but this only goes for when you have to draw some tricky buildings or statues. I know most of you are into comic, webcomic or manga, so I want to prepare you guys that's not going to be an easy pill to swallow, but you need to basically be a jack of all trades here. There's no skill you won't need, be it advanced shape design in order to draw objects like swords, anatomy for action poses, composition for arranging your panels, perspective so that your panels don't all look the same, and so on. I don't think you have to be a master of all of them, but you at least have to be good at all of them. But after all, since there are so many different art styles, it's kinda up to you which one of these skills you'll actually master. Depending on which skills you level, your manga or comic's gonna look completely different. But yeah, I'd say level as much as you possibly can here. By the way, I've made videos about almost all of these topics I mentioned so far, from shading to rendering and dynamics and many more. So maybe you would want to take a look at those videos I've made. But there's still one thing left, right? Yeah, it's a skill I couldn't really find a place for. And that's because it's kind of the most important one, yet it's nothing you can practice per se. It's something that evolves over time. It's the observation skill. It's the skill to analyze an artwork and to understand what makes it so good. Is it the way the artwork's composed? Is it the way it's shaded, or the way the anatomy is handled? Maybe the pose that's implemented has a unique dynamic. So now, this analytic skill allows you to learn from other artworks. This is also how you'll be able to develop your very own art style, by learning from other artworks and implementing what makes them so good into your artworks. This autodidactic skill is what makes you evolve indefinitely. Without this skill, without being autodidactic, you will always have to depend on books, tutorials and classes. But if you truly acquire this skill, you will be able to learn from any artwork you're seeing. And learning just by looking at something helps you to level up your skills even without actively trying. So you'll keep evolving more and more. And this is the ultimate skill that every artist should be aware of. Because there's always something in an artwork that you could learn from. So, just like the old master said, ancora imparo.